Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the Mexican-American War helped the United States expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean? Learn how the idea of manifest destiny helped more than 7 million Americans move west across North America in search of land and new opportunities. Discover that the 19th century symbol of manifest destiny was the woman, Columbia, who floated above the ground, leading westward expansion by carrying a telegraph wire and a school book, each symbolizing growth in technology, knowledge, and civilization into the West. In 1848, the United States bought the landmass equivalent of California, Nevada, Utah, and most of the American Southwest for what amounts to about $373 million today.
Yeah, which is just, it's a staggering number when you really think about it.
Right. I mean, just think about that for a second. You can't even buy a Major League Baseball team for $373 million today. Yet, the U.S. acquired over 1 million square miles of prime, resource-rich real estate for exactly that price.
Exactly.
So how did they pull off the most asymmetrical, unbelievable land deal in human history? Well, by starting a war.
It is a really sobering reality to confront. Because, we often look at a map of North America and just assume those borders were carved out over centuries of slow diplomatic agreements or like geological barriers.
You just figure it happened naturally.
Right. But the current shape of the United States was largely hammered into existence in a very short, incredibly violent window of time.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources for this one. Everything from the original text of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to military movement records from the 1840s.
We've also got some fascinating newspaper editorials and historical analyses of the political chaos in both Washington and Mexico City at the time.
Yeah, it's a lot of ground to cover. Our mission for this deep dive is to take all of this material and really understand the specific chain of events that rapidly expanded the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean, forever reshaping the continent.
And, we aren't just talking about lines moving on parchment here. The scale of what we are going to explore involves profound human costs, total political upheaval in 2 separate nations, and mass migrations that completely rewired the demographics of the West.
Right, because to understand how the map changed so violently, we have to look at the exact mechanics of the border dispute that ignited the entire Mexican-American War. I mean, you don't just wake up one morning and decide to annex 1 million square miles. You need a spark.
Precisely. You need a spark. And that spark happens in 1845. That is the year Texas officially declared its independence and was annexed as the 28th state of the American Union.
But Mexico didn't just, nod and accept that, right?
No, not at all.
Because from their perspective, Texas wasn't an independent nation free to join whoever they wanted. It was a rebel province.
Exactly. Mexico flat out refused to recognize the annexation.
Yeah.
And they certainly did not recognize this new union with America. So you instantly have this massive, heavily contested territory.
Right.
You have 2 sovereign nations fundamentally disagreeing on who owns what, and critically, they disagreed on where the actual southern border of this new state lies.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where President James K. Polk decides to force the issue, right?
He does, yeah.
He sends United States forces south, right down to the Rio Grande River. And the Mexican army, obviously, sees an invading force in what they consider their territory, so they attack.
Right, which is exactly what Polk was waiting for.
Yeah, Polk instantly uses that skirmish to justify asking Congress to declare war. And Congress officially does so on May 13th, 1846. It's like 2 neighbors arguing over exactly where the property line is, but one neighbor parks a bulldozer right on the disputed edge.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, he leaves the keys in the ignition and just waits for the other guy to throw a rock. And the second that rock hits, they can justify knocking down the whole fence.
That analogy perfectly captures the tactical maneuvering at play here. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, Polk's military movement to the Rio Grande wasn't some defensive posture to protect a few vulnerable Texas settlers.
Right, it was intentional.
Highly intentional.
Yeah.
Moving troops into a contested, explosive zone is a calculated provocation. He knew it was almost guaranteed to draw a military response.
Wait, was he entirely sure Mexico would attack? What if they had just retreated and protested diplomatically?
Well, if they retreated, Polk essentially secures the expanded border without firing a shot.
Oh, so it's a win-win for him.
Exactly. By forcing the Mexican army to confront U.S. troops on disputed ground, he put them in an impossible position. And when they did attack, that response provided the exact leverage Polk needed to go to Congress.
Because he wanted more than Texas.
Oh, absolutely. He didn't just want to secure Texas. He had a much larger, sweeping territorial ambition.
Yeah.
He was looking all the way to the Pacific Ocean.
But here's where the mechanics of this history get really complex, I think.
Yeah.
Because a skirmish at the Rio Grande gives you the legal or, political excuse to ask Congress for war.
Right.
But an excuse isn't enough to mobilize hundreds of thousands of citizens, send them into the desert, and fund a massive military campaign.
Yeah.
You need a deeply rooted justification for that.
You need a narrative. You have to convince the public that what you were doing isn't just a tactical land grab, but something essential.
And that psychological transition from a physical standoff at a river to a nationwide crusade brings us to the ideology of manifest destiny. The phrase is so famous it almost loses its meaning today. But at the time, it was an incredibly powerful cultural framing. Manifest destiny was the belief that God had destined the settlement of North America by the United States.
It transformed the conflict from a border dispute into a divine mission. It wasn't just that the United States could expand it, it was that they had a preordained right and a duty to do so.
I want to look specifically at the guy who coined the term, a newspaper editor named John L. O'Sullivan.
Oh, his writing is fascinating.
It really is. He wrote this piece about westward expansion, and the language is just dripping with purpose. He wrote, quote, "The right of our manifest destiny is to overspread and possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative self-government entrusted to us."
Notice how deliberately O'Sullivan chooses his words there to reframe the entire concept of conquest.
See, that's what I want to push back on a little bit. Are you telling me the American public actually bought this? Like, were people genuinely reading this and thinking, yes, we are on a divine educational crusade? Or was this just cynical, elite-level propaganda to justify stealing land?
It's really a mix of both, which is why it was so incredibly effective. For the political elite, it absolutely provided convenient moral cover for expansion.
Sure.
But for the average citizen reading O'Sullivan's newspaper, words like providence implied God's direct will. Framing the invasion as spreading the great experiment of liberty made claiming contested territory feel like a moral imperative.
So it makes them feel good about it.
Exactly. You aren't displacing people or conquering a neighbor. You are delivering freedom and civilization to a wilderness. That is a narrative people actively want to believe about themselves.
And nothing visualizes that narrative better than the artwork that came out of this era. Our sources highlight this incredibly famous 19th century painting by John Gass called American Progress.
Yes, the classic image.
If you've ever taken a U.S. history class, you have seen this image. It features this giant angelic woman named Columbia just floating westward across the sky.
Right, and Columbia is the literal personification of the United States in this era. She's serving as the visual embodiment of manifest destiny.
But look at the details of what she is actually doing in the painting. She's not carrying a sword or a rifle. She is holding a school book in one hand, and she is stringing a telegraph wire across the continent with the other.
It perfectly illustrates the psychological marketing we are talking about. The telegraph wire represents the unstoppable march of modern technology. The school book represents education, civilization, and democratic ideals.
So they're bringing in the future.
Exactly. The painting is telling the public, our conquest brings light.
It's brilliant marketing, honestly. You rebrand a military invasion as a technological and educational rollout, but, eventually the soaring rhetoric of manifest destiny hits the brutal geographic and human reality of actual warfare.
It always does.
The ideological engine ran hot, but when the dust settled, the reality at the peace table was incredibly grim.
The human cost is staggering, and it's something the concept of manifest destiny completely glossed over. The Mexican-American War lasted roughly 2 years.
Right.
And when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was finally signed on May 26, 1848, the conflict had claimed 13,000 American lives and a devastating 50,000 Mexican lives.
Man, 63,000 human beings dead. It's a sobering reality. And the result of that immense bloodshed was a physical transformation of the continent that is almost hard to comprehend today.
It really is.
The United States didn't just secure the border at the Rio Grande. President Polk acquired over 1 million square miles of new territory.
1 million square miles completely redefines the geometry of the nation. I mean, it shifted the balance of power on an entire continent overnight.
To put that landmass into perspective for you, the territory handed over in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo includes the entire modern states of California, Nevada, and Utah.
Just massive amounts of land.
Yeah. And it includes most of Arizona, the western half of New Mexico, the western quarter of Colorado, and even the southwest corner of Wyoming. Half of what we now consider the American West was handed over in this one single document.
And this brings us back to the incredible transaction you mentioned at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
In exchange for this unimaginably vast stretch of the continent, the United States agreed to pay Mexico $15 million.
Which, adjusted for inflation, is that $373 million today. It's absurd. But here's where it gets really interesting. What makes this treaty almost unbelievable is the sheer historical timing of what happened next.
Oh, the timing it's almost too crazy to be true.
Literally just days before Mexico and the United States signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, gold was discovered in California.
The timing is so perfect it feels scripted.
It's like buying a beat-up used car for its scrap metal value, driving it off the lot, and the very next morning finding a winning lottery ticket stuffed into the glove box. I mean, days before the ink is dry on a treaty handing over California, you discover it is sitting on massive reserves of gold. If Mexico had known about that gold a month earlier, how does that change the peace negotiations?
It likely changes everything. Mexico might have fought harder to retain at least that specific territory or demanded an exponentially higher price.
Right. They wouldn't have just let it go for $15 million.
No way. But because the treaty was already moving forward, that perfectly timed discovery instantly supercharged the very westward expansion O'Sullivan dreamed of. The ideological concept of manifest destiny immediately transformed into a frantic, chaotic, literal gold rush.
But here is the critical pivot in the story. You dump sudden, immense wealth and 1 million square miles of unorganized land into the laps of these two nations, and it doesn't magically solve their problems.
No, not at all.
In fact, it acted like a giant pressure cooker that immediately destabilized both countries.
Well, let's start by looking at how this impacted Mexico. The situation in Mexico during the war and immediately after was defined by extreme, almost paralyzing political instability.
Yeah, the internal politics were a mess.
To understand why Mexico struggled to mount a unified defense, you just have to look at the turnover in their leadership. In the year 1846 alone, the year the war began, the Mexican presidency changed hands 4 times.
4 presidents in 12 months is chaos.
It is.
But the administrative numbers are even worse. The sources show the War Ministry changed hands 6 times, and the Finance Ministry changed hands an astounding 16 times in that single year.
Just imagine the logistical impossibility of that. How does a nation organize supply lines, pay its soldiers, or negotiate treaties when the person holding the national checkbook is replaced every 3 weeks?
You can't. I mean, the army can't even buy bullets if the central government is constantly collapsing.
Exactly. Because of this profound structural disintegration, there was no centralized power capable of sustaining the war effort. Regional leaders were left completely isolated.
Wow.
The chaos was so deep that some factions within Mexico actually favored the outcome of the war.
Wait, really? They wanted to lose the land?
Well, they viewed the treaty and the loss of territory as a necessary amputation to forcefully end the internal hemorrhaging of resources.
Yeah.
They just wanted to bring some semblance of stability to what was left of the country.
That is a brutal reality to accept. But then you look at the United States. They won the war. They secured the land. They found the gold.
Right.
You would expect this to be a moment of absolute triumphant national unity. Instead, this massive prize instantly sparks violent internal debates that threaten to destroy the country. How did they not see this coming?
What's fascinating here is the profound irony of it all. The United States absorbed 1 million square miles under the righteous banner of spreading the great experiment of liberty.
Yeah.
But the immediate burning question that arose was, will slavery be permitted in these new Western territories?
Because of the balance of power. Every new state added to the Union gets 2 senators.
Exactly.
If you add half a continent of new states, whoever controls that territory, whether they are free states or slave states, controls the entire future of the federal government.
You hit the nail on the head. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo brought incredible wealth and geographic dominance. But by forcing the issue of slavery into all of these unorganized territories, it planted the very seeds that would threaten to tear the United States apart.
It laid the groundwork for the Civil War.
It did. These weren't just standard political debates over tax policy. They were violent, foundational clashes about human bondage and the survival of the Union itself.
And while the politicians in Washington were screaming at each other over the fate of these territories, the land itself was rapidly filling up with people.
Oh, absolutely flooding with people.
Driven by the end of the war and the promise of gold, more than 7 million pioneers took part in the ensuing westward expansion.
7 million people packing their entire lives into wagons and walking across an unforgiving continent. It remains one of the largest and most consequential mass migrations in human history.
And it was an incredibly diverse cross-section of humanity. You had immigrants arriving from across the globe looking for a fresh start. You had freed slaves heading west to escape the oppressive, entrenched structures of the East and the South.
Right.
You had farmers seeking acreage that wasn't already monopolized. Manifest Destiny wasn't just a painting of Columbia floating in the sky anymore. It was 7 million actual people leaving deep wagon ruts in the earth.
It shifted from a philosophical justification for war into a physical reality that completely reshaped the demographic and economic future of the continent.
Which makes this history deeply physically personal. Those 7 million pioneers aren't just abstract statistics in a history book. For many of you listening right now, those people are your direct ancestors.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Your existence today might literally be the result of a family packing up and pushing into that newly acquired territory.
It's a fascinating layer to add to this. The geopolitical maneuvers of presidents and generals ultimately dictated the personal destinies of millions of families.
And if you want to understand how your own family fits into this massive shifting map, FamilySearch.org is an incredible tool. You can use it to explore your family tree, trace those pioneer migration routes, and actually uncover your own heritage.
Which is so cool to see.
It really is. Finding your ancestors and recording their stories for future generations takes this massive global event and grounds it in your own personal history.
It removes the distance between the past and the present. You begin to see how historical treaties directly inform where you were born and how your family arrived there.
It absolutely does. So, to pull all of these threads together, what began as a calculated border standoff at the Rio Grande, driven by President Polk and sold to the public through the divine marketing of Manifest Destiny, resulted in the United States doubling its size.
Right.
It triggered the California gold rush, devastated the Mexican political system, and set 7 million pioneers into motion.
It solidified the borders of the contiguous United States as we recognize them today. But, analyzing the direct fallout of this era leaves us with a truly fascinating question to consider.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've focused entirely on how this massive land acquisition pushed the United States westward. But by securing the entire Pacific coast, the nation physically ran out of continent.
Huh, yeah, I guess they did.
The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo didn't just end westward expansion, it arguably forced America to immediately pivot its gaze outward. By suddenly owning ports in California facing the Pacific Ocean, did the end of the Mexican-American War instantly lock the United States into its next phase of history?
Like shifting from continental conquest to looking across the ocean toward Asia and global empire building.
Exactly. Did peace in 1848 just set the stage for something even bigger?
Wow. When you hit the edge of the map, you don't just stop. You start looking for a bigger map. Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.